Hey, let's get to know a really cool, obscure Marvel character. He might be a slight Batman ripoff, but you know what? Who cares? He's cool on his own. Let's get to know the Shroud. The Shroud was created by Steve Englehart and Herb Trimpe and made his first appearance in Supervillain Team Up in issue 5 from 1976. This featured Doctor Doom and the Submariner. Orphaned at just the age of 10, and his parents were gunned down. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, wealthy Max Quincy Coleridge dedicated his adult life to the opposition of crime, studying criminology and subjecting himself to a strict exercise regimen. He traveled throughout Asia and underwent unrevealed adventures, eventually studying for 7 years with the cult of Kali. Branded by the cultists, Coleridge lost his physical sight, but gained mystic compensation. He began his career as the Shroud by targeting Doctor Doom, a perennial world menace, only to end up allying with Doom and Namor against the dreadful Red Skull. Exposure to one of the Skull's devices either granted or awoke in the Shroud the power to summon and control darkness. He then altered his methods and vowed to undermine crime from within. Much like the Green Hornet, he became a fake gang lord, and he secretly allied himself with other heroes like Spider-Woman, the Avengers, and any other heroes he might come across. At one time, he was offered the chance to become a founding member of the Avengers West Coast team, but he turned them down. He continued to assist the team, however, when he could, and was given clearance and access to Avengers resources when he needed to. He eventually gathered several superhuman misfits and called themselves the Night Shift, most of whom genuinely believed he targeted criminals as a rival, not as a hero. They themselves were indeed criminals. The team helped Captain America, D-Man, and Ms. Marvel uncover the Power Brokers operation and its ties to the government programs trying to create other super soldiers. The Shroud was eventually abandoned by the team when his true agenda was eventually uncovered. He briefly relocated to New York, but soon returned back to California. The Night Shift continued to operate with a new leader, Hangman, and directly opposed Shroud's former teammates in the Avengers. Sometime after this, he began a relationship with Julia Carpenter, who was at one point known as Spider-Woman, but she had lost her powers. So, the Shroud hired scientists to synthesize the formula that had originally empowered her, enabling her to return to action as Arachne. She and Shroud became much closer and eventually became lovers, but when she was recruited by the Initiative to locate and apprehend Superhuman Registration Act violators, she secretly worked with Shroud to help others escape capture. Following her exposure, Shroud attempted to flee with Arachne, but ultimately sacrificed his freedom to allow her escape. Although held as a registration violator, he was cleared of earlier criminal charges due to Tony Stark's knowledge of his motives as a gang leader. Shroud escaped captivity later on and escaped to Canada, where he reunited with Arachne and directly assisted Omega Flight on a regular basis. He eventually joined the team full-time when the team became undermanned during the Secret Invasion. After this, he became involved in the Shadowland event. After Omega Flight eventually disbanded, another member left, leaving only himself, Julia, and Sasquatch, and after the Superhuman Registration Act had been abolished, the Shroud returned to New York, investigating several murders supposedly related to the Hand, and Daredevil's Shadowland and Hell's Kitchen in New York in general. This led to a conflict with Paladin, who ambushes him during his investigation. Of course, the two heroes resolve their differences and actually end up working with the other street heroes to take down the demonically possessed Daredevil. The Shroud eventually returned back to San Francisco. However, something had changed with the Shroud, and Maximilian fell into a depressive state and let himself go. His aggressive vigilantism and uncooperative behavior made him an annoyance for the commissioner of the police force of San Francisco. Recently, Daredevil's identity had been exposed to the public at large, and Daredevil himself then moved to San Francisco. With his identity made public, the Shroud became quite jealous of him. Despite that, the Shroud and Daredevil worked to take down the crime lord, the Owl. However, when the two vigilantes had the Owl cornered, the crime lord promised to help Max reunite with Julia Carpenter, who he had become estranged from. The Shroud then escaped with the Owl, and the crime boss manipulated Max into helping him gain access to a cutting-edge piece of technology. from a fiber optics company that delivered data directly into a person's brain, turning them virtually omniscient. Daredevil intercepted both of them, but not before the owl entered in contact with this device. After leaving the owl to the police, Daredevil tried to talk some sense into the Shroud, but to no avail. At this point, he became even more unhinged and actually started to stalk Julia, who had left him at this point. This drove him in even darker places. Eventually, he learned of Julia's location from one of Fisk's goons. The Shroud then interrupted a death match between Daredevil and the Kingpin's assassin, Akari. Eventually, Daredevil was able to take down the owl and actually damage Kingpin's empire at the same time. After his fall, the Shroud liberated the owl. Daredevil and Julia then set up a trap to capture Mac due to his unhinged state. On the pretense that she wanted to reconcile with him, Julia met with Max and kissed him. However, she had covered her lips with a tranquilizer, knocking him out almost instantly so he could be apprehended. Max was subsequently locked up, and Julia put his surveillance system to use in order to investigate new technologies. At this time, the Shroud still remains in custody as far as we know. I was not a huge fan of this take of the character, and I'm hoping somebody else gets a hold of him and returns him to his heroic nature and enhances what is there of a great character. The Shroud possesses the mystical ability to summon the absolute darkness of the Dark Force dimension by opening a mystical portal into the Dark Force dimension and drawing its thick, icky, inky atmosphere into various quantities into the Earth's dimension. This darkness is not simply the absence of light, but the negation of it. No illumination can penetrate it. It is unknown how much of this darkness the Shroud can summon at once. He can blanket a small auditorium in darkness within several seconds. The darkness he projects does not fill a volume instantly. It is possible to see its hazy boundary move like thick black smoke in the air. There appears to be no limit to the length of time the Shroud can maintain this darkness. The full offensive capabilities of the Shroud's darkness have yet to be fully explored, but he has used it to physically incapacitate his foes. The Shroud has control over the darkness so as to create hazy-edged, featureless black shapes with it, the complexity of which is limited only by his imagination. The Shroud possesses a mystical sense of perception and enabling him to see even through his own mantle of darkness. This mystical sense gives him psychic impressions of his environment within a radius of about 100 feet of him. Unlike Daredevil, the Shroud can receive non-visual sensory impressions through solid objects. Thus, he can perceive people and objects in the room next to him with the ease that he can perceive the contents of the room he is in. He is also a master martial artist, having trained with monks and other various forms of the martial arts for years. He can take on Daredevil and other high-trained fighters in the MCU. He's not to be underestimated. If you want to learn more, look into all of these comics featuring the Shroud from Marvel and get to know a really cool character.
If you have enjoyed what you have watched, please hit the subscribe button and make sure you check out our other videos. Thank you.